The stars looked different from here. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window of his ship and watched the alien suns burn in colors he had never seen before. His hands shook as he worked on the broken control panel. Sparks flew from the damaged wires, and the smell of burned metal filled the air. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jake said to his ship. The jump drive had broken 3 hours ago, throwing him into unknown space. He was supposed to be exploring the outer edge of human territory, not lost in some alien corner of the galaxy. The ship was small, built for one person and long trips. Jake had been alone for 6 months, mapping star systems and looking for new planets. It was dangerous work, but someone had to do it. Humans were spreading across the galaxy, and they needed to know what was out there. Jake's radio crackled with static. He tried to contact Earth, but the signal was too weak. He was too far from home. The nearest human base was probably months away, even if his ship could make the jump. Right now, it couldn't even move. He floated in the darkness between 2 red suns, working by the light of his emergency lamps. The Wanderer was a good ship, but it was old. The quantum drive was new technology, still being tested. Jake had volunteered to try it because he liked taking risks. Now he wondered if that had been a mistake. Something beeped on his scanner. Jake looked up from his work and saw dots of light moving toward him. At first, he thought they might be asteroids or space debris, but as they got closer, he realized they were ships. Big ships, much bigger than his. Holy ... Jake stopped himself and reached for his telescope. Through the lens, he could see them clearly now. They were unlike anything humans had ever built. The ships were long and thin, made of what looked like crystal or glass. They sparkled in the starlight like giant jewels floating through space. Thought there were dozens of them, all heading straight for him. Jake's heart started beating faster. He had found aliens, or they had found him. Either way, this was not good. He was alone in a broken ship with no way to call for help. The biggest ship was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the largest human vessel. It moved with grace despite its size, gliding through space like a fish through water. Smaller ships surrounded it like a pack of wolves protecting their leader. Jake counted at least 40 ships in total. They moved in perfect formation, never breaking their pattern. It was clear they were military vessels, not explorers or traders. These were warships, and they were coming for him. His radio suddenly came alive with alien voices. The sounds were strange, like music mixed with growling. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the tone. It was not friendly. They were giving him orders, probably telling him to surrender. "I don't speak alien," Jake said into his radio, hoping they might understand English. "My name is Jake Morrison. I'm from Earth. My ship is broken, and I'm not a threat to anyone." The alien voices got louder and more aggressive. Jake could see weapon ports opening on the nearest ships. Energy began to glow inside the crystal hulls, building up for an attack. They were going to shoot him if he didn't do what they wanted. Jake looked at his broken engines. Even if he wanted to run, he couldn't. The Wanderer was trapped, surrounded by an entire alien fleet. He had walked into their territory by accident, and now they were going to capture or kill him. But Jake had one advantage they didn't know about. Hidden in his ship's belly was a prototype weapon that most human captains didn't even know existed. The quantum torpedo was experimental, designed by Dr. Lisa Chun back on Earth. It was supposed to create a small tear in spacetime, enough to destroy a single enemy ship. Jake had never used it before. He wasn't even sure it would work. But he was running out of options fast. The aliens were getting closer, and their weapons were almost ready to fire. He made his decision. Jake would rather die fighting than become some alien's prisoner. He had read reports about other species that had been conquered by advanced aliens. Most of them were now slaves, working in mines or factories on distant worlds. That was not going to happen to him. Jake's fingers moved across the weapon controls. The quantum torpedo powered up slowly, drawing energy from his ship's main reactor. Red lights flashed on his console as the weapon charged. He had enough power for one shot, maybe two if he was lucky. The alien fleet was now close enough that he could see details on their ships. They were beautiful in a cold, threatening way. The crystal hulls were carved with strange symbols that seemed to glow from within. Gun ports lined their sides like angry eyes. Jake aimed the torpedo at the biggest ship, the one that looked like their leader. If he was going to make a statement, it should be a big one. Maybe if he destroyed their command ship, the others would think twice about attacking other humans. "This is for Earth," Jake said, and pressed the firing button. The torpedo shot out from his ship like a streak of blue light. It moved faster than anything Jake had ever seen, crossing the distance to the alien fleet in seconds. The lead ship tried to turn away, but it was too big and too slow. The explosion was not what Jake expected. Instead of a normal blast, the torpedo created a bubble of twisted space around the alien ship. The bubble grew larger and larger, swallowing other ships in the fleet. Strange lights flashed inside it, colors that hurt to look at. Then everything went white. Jake felt his ship being pulled forward toward the expanding bubble of chaos. He grabbed onto his chair and held on as the wanderer was thrown around like a toy in a hurricane. When the light faded, Jake found himself floating in empty space. The alien fleet was gone, all of them. Even the wreckage had vanished, as if they had never existed at all. Only Jake's small ship remained, drifting alone among the stars. Jake stared at the empty space where 40 enemy ships had been just moments before. His experimental weapon had done something impossible. It had made an entire fleet disappear. He should have been happy, but instead he felt scared. What kind of weapon could do that? And what would happen when other people found out about it? Far away on distant worlds, the effects of Jake's weapon were already beginning to spread. The quantum torpedo had done more than destroy ships. It had torn a hole in the fabric of space itself, and that hole was growing larger every second. The alien empire that had ruled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years was about to discover that their greatest weakness was also their greatest strength. The technology that connected their worlds was about to become this instrument of their destruction. But Jake didn't know any of that yet. He was just a scared human pilot, alone in space, trying to figure out how to get home. He had no idea that his single act of desperation had just changed the fate of billions of lives across the galaxy. The mysterious ship had appeared, fired once, and vanished. Now the real story could begin. Admiral KingsHFY had been sleeping when the first reports came in. The crystal beside his bed began to glow with urgent red light, pulling him from his dreams. As commander of the Eternal Dominion, he was used to emergency calls, but this felt different. The light was wrong somehow, flickering when it should have been steady. He pressed his hand against the communication crystal, expecting to hear the voice of his bridge crew. Instead, he heard only static mixed with strange musical tones. The crystal felt cold under his palm, colder than it had ever been before. "Bridge, report," KingsHFY said into the darkness of his quarters. No answer came. He tried again, speaking. Louder this time. Still nothing but the eerie music that seemed to come from the crystal itself. The Admiral got out of bed and walked to his personal command center. The wall was covered with smaller crystals, each one connected to a different part of his ship. Half of them were dark, and the others flickered like dying stars. In his 30 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Lisa Chun was working late in her laboratory on Earth. She had been awake for 18 hours straight, trying to solve a problem with her quantum equations. The math was beautiful, but dangerous, like trying to balance on the edge of a knife. Lisa had created the quantum torpedo as a theoretical weapon, something that existed only in computer models and test chambers. She never expected anyone to actually build it, let alone use it. A weapon was designed to create a small tear in space-time, but only for a few seconds. It should have been harmless to anything except the direct target. Her computer beeped with an incoming message. Lisa looked at the screen and saw data from the Deep Space Monitoring Station. Strange energy readings were coming from the Andromeda sector, waves of quantum distortion that made no sense. The patterns looked familiar, but that was impossible. No one was supposed to be testing her weapon in deep space back on the Eternal. Dominion. Admiral KingsHFY finally managed to contact his bridge crew using the old backup systems. What he heard made his blood run cold. The patrol fleet that had been sent to investigate the mysterious ship was gone. All 43 vessels had vanished without a trace. What do you mean, gone? KingsHFY demanded as he stepped onto the bridge. His officers looked scared, something he had never seen before. These were experienced warriors who had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy. "Sir, they just disappeared," said Commander Vexnall, his second in command. One moment they were there, the next moment nothing. No wreckage, no distress calls, no energy signatures. It's like they never existed. KingsHFY looked at the main display screen. It showed a map of local space, with blinking dots representing every ship in the fleet. Where the patrol had been, there was only empty darkness. 43 ships and over 10,000 crew members, gone in an instant. What about the alien vessel? KingsHFY asked. The one they went to investigate? Gone too, sir. Whatever happened out there, it took everything. The Admiral stared at the screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for 3,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved dozens of species. Nothing had ever threatened them like this before. As the hours passed, more reports came in from across the Empire. Communication crystals were failing on every world. The quantum network that connected their civilization was breaking down piece by piece. Ships were losing power, space stations were going dark, and planetary defense systems were shutting down. On the mining world of Kepler-7, the slave workers noticed it first. The crystal towers that powered their chains began to flicker and dim. For the first time in centuries, the energy fields that kept them trapped started to weaken. Marcus Brown was one of those slaves, a human who had been captured during a raid on a frontier colony. He had been working in the mines for 3 years, picking rare metals for his alien masters. When the power began to fail, he saw his chance. "The barriers are down," he whispered to his fellow prisoners. "This might be our only opportunity to escape." The other slaves looked at him with hope and fear in their eyes. They had dreamed of freedom for so long that it seemed impossible it might actually happen. But the evidence was all around them. The crystal technology that had kept them trapped was failing. Dr. Chun was now tracking the quantum distortions across multiple star systems. The wave of destruction was spreading outward from a single point, like ripples in a pond. But these ripples were traveling faster than light, jumping from star to star through some kind of quantum connection. "This is impossible," she said to her assistant, Dr. Robert Kim. "The quantum torpedo should have created a localized effect. It shouldn't be able to spread like this." Robert looked at the data flowing across their screens. Unless it interacted with something else, something that was already connected across multiple star systems. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had designed the weapon to exploit weaknesses in quantum entangled materials. If an entire civilization was built on that kind of technology, and if all of their systems were connected, "Oh no," she whispered. "What have we done?" The Zephyrian Empire was discovering the answer to that question in the worst possible way. Their greatest achievement had become their greatest weakness. The crystal technology that allowed them to communicate across the galaxy instantly was also spreading the quantum disruption to every corner of their territory. High Commander Valkyries stood in the central command chamber on Zephyr Prime, watching his empire die. The great crystal that had coordinated their civilization for millennia was cracking, its surface covered with spreading lines of darkness. Each crack represented another world going silent, another piece of their empire falling into chaos. "How long do we have?" he asked his chief scientist, Dr. Zexmyra. "Unknown, sir. The disruption is accelerating. At this rate, we might lose all. Quantum communication within days. Our ships will be stranded wherever they are. Our worlds will be cut off from each other." Valkyries closed his eyes and tried to think. The Empire had survived wars, plagues, and natural disasters. But this was different. This was an attack on the very foundation of their civilization. Someone or something had found a way to turn their greatest strength against them. "What do we know about the ship that started this?" he asked. "Very little, sir. It was small, primitive by our standards. But it carried a weapon unlike anything in our databases. The energy signature was completely alien. On distant worlds, the effects of the quantum disruption were becoming visible. Cities built around power crystals began to shake as the energy fields destabilized. Transportation systems that had worked flawlessly for centuries started to fail. The artificial gravity that made life possible on many worlds began to flicker on and off. But it wasn't just the technology that was failing. The Zephyrian Empire was held together by more than just quantum crystals. It was built on the belief that their technology made them superior to all other species. When that technology began to fail, so did their confidence. Riots broke out on several worlds as the ruling class lost control. Slave species that had been oppressed for generations saw their chance for freedom. The careful balance of power that had kept the empire stable for millennia was crumbling along with their technology. Jake Morrison was still drifting in space, unaware of the chaos he had unleashed. His ship's engines were slowly coming back online, and he was preparing to make the long journey home. He had no idea that his single act of desperation had just triggered the collapse of an entire interstellar empire. The quantum torpedo had done exactly what Dr. Chun had designed it to do. It had found a weakness in the enemy's technology and exploited it. But neither she nor Jake had realized how connected the Zephyrian Empire really was. Every ship, every space station, every city was linked through quantum-entangled crystals. When one part of the network was damaged, the disruption spread to every other part. In the span of a few hours, the most powerful empire in the galaxy had been reduced to scattered fragments. Their fleets were powerless, their worlds were isolated, and their government was in chaos. The mysterious ship had appeared, fired once, and vanished. But its impact would be felt for generations to come. The age of the Zephyrian Empire was ending. What would replace it was still unknown. But one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. The quantum torpedo had torn a hole in more than just space-time. It had torn a hole in the fabric of galactic civilization itself. Somewhere in the darkness of space, that hole was still growing. The first city to fall was New Zephyr, a glittering metropolis built on the moon of Altair IV. The massive crystal spire at its center had powered the city for 800 years. Providing energy, transportation, and communication to 5 million inhabitants. When the quantum disruption reached it, the crystal began to sing. It started as a low humming sound that made people stop and listen. Children playing in the crystal gardens looked up at the towers with wonder. Adults walking too. Work paused on the moving sidewalks. The sound was beautiful at first, like a choir of angels. Then the crystal began to crack. Mayor Jin Cole was in her office when the first window shattered. She looked out at the city and saw the great spire splitting down the middle, bright light pouring out of the cracks like liquid fire. A humming turned into a scream that hurt to hear. "Evacuate the city," she shouted into her communicator. But the communication system was powered by the same crystal that was destroying itself. Her words went nowhere. The crystal spire collapsed 20 minutes later, taking half the city with it. The explosion could be seen from orbit, a pillar of light that reached into space before fading to nothing. When the light was gone, so was New Zephyr. In its place was a crater filled with strange, glowing dust. Similar scenes played out across the Zephyrian Empire. On Vega 2, the orbital cities lost power and began falling toward the planet below. On Centauri 9, the artificial suns that warmed. The polar colonies flickered and died, leaving millions to freeze in the eternal winter. High Commander Valkyries watched it all from his command center on Zephyr Prime. The great display screen showed a map of the Empire, with each world represented by a glowing dot. As he watched, the dots began to go dark one by one. In 3 days, he had lost contact with over 60 worlds. "Sir," said his aide, Commander Rixvel, "the outer colonies are reporting mass evacuations. The people are fleeing in whatever ships." "Still work. Where are they going?" Valkyries asked. "Anywhere but here. The primitive worlds mostly. Places that don't depend on crystal technology." Valkyries nodded grimly. The irony was not lost on him. The worlds they had conquered and looked down upon were now the only safe places left. The primitive planets with their simple machines and basic power sources were not affected by the quantum disruption. Dr. Lisa Chun was working around the clock to understand what was happening. Her laboratory on Earth had become a war room, filled with scientists from across human space. They were tracking the quantum wave as it spread through the alien empire, trying to find a way to stop it. "It's self-sustaining," she explained to General Paul Anderson, the military commander overseeing the crisis. The quantum torpedo created a resonance cascade in their crystal network. Every time it reaches a new node, it gets stronger. "Can we stop it?" Anderson asked. "I don't know. We don't even understand their technology well enough to predict where it will go next. For all we know, it could spread to other sectors of the galaxy." The general looked worried. "What about our own quantum technology? Could this affect us?" Lisa shook her head. "Our quantum systems are completely different. We use isolated quantum processors, not a network like theirs. We should be safe." But even as she said it, Lisa wasn't completely sure. The quantum torpedo had done things that should have been impossible. She was beginning to suspect that they had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple weapon. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the Zephyrian Empire, chaos was spreading faster than the quantum disruption itself. On the industrial world of Titan 7, the slave workers had broken free from their crystal-powered chains. Led by a former human soldier named Danny Walsh, they had taken control of the planet's factories and spaceports. "We have a choice," Danny told the crowd of freed slaves. "We can run and hide, or we can stay and build something better. This is our chance to create a world where no one is a slave." The crowd cheered, but Danny could see the fear in their eyes. They had been slaves for so long that freedom felt dangerous. They didn't know how to take care of themselves, how to make decisions, how to survive without masters telling them what to do. Similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds. The Kalari, a species that had been enslaved for over 1,000 years, were struggling to remember how to govern themselves. The Soraks, Master engineers who had been forced to build weapons for their conquerors were trying to figure out how to use their skills for peaceful purposes, but not everyone was. Celebrating the Empire's collapse. On the wealthy core worlds, the ruling class was fighting to maintain control. They had built their power on the crystal technology, and they were not ready to give it up. Lord Commander Zeknol gathered what remained of the Imperial fleet around Zephyr Prime. His ships were old models that still used fusion reactors instead of crystal power. They were slower and less powerful than the modern vessels, but they still worked. "We will restore order," he announced to his captains. "The Empire has survived worse than this. We will find the source of this disruption and destroy it." But even as he spoke, Zeknol knew it was probably too late. The Empire was not just losing its technology. It was losing its people. Millions of citizens were fleeing to the outer worlds, carrying with them stories of the Empire's weakness. The myth of Zephyrian superiority was crumbling along with their cities. On Earth, Captain Amy Rodriguez was preparing to lead a mission into the former Empire territory. Her ship, the Defiant, was one of the newest human vessels, equipped with the latest sensors and weapons. Her orders were simple: find out what was happening and report back. "Be careful out there," General Anderson told her before she left. "We don't know what we're dealing with. The quantum disruption might be just the beginning." Amy nodded. She had read the reports from the deep space monitoring stations. The energy readings were unlike anything humans had ever seen. It was as if space itself was being rewritten in that region of the galaxy. The Defiant jumped into hyperspace, heading for the coordinates where Jake Morrison had encountered the alien fleet. Amy wanted to see the source of the disruption for herself. Maybe she could find some clue about how to stop it from spreading. When she arrived at the target coordinates, Amy found nothing but empty space. Her sensors detected trace amounts of exotic matter, the kind that was produced by quantum weapons. But there was no sign of the alien fleet or the mysterious ship that had destroyed it. "Captain," said her science officer, Lieutenant Ben Parker, "I'm picking up something strange. The space here is different. It's like the quantum field has been permanently altered." Amy looked at the sensor readings. The space around them was filled with quantum anomalies, pockets of twisted reality that made no sense. It was as if the fabric of space-time itself had been damaged. "Take us to the nearest inhabited world," Amy ordered. "I want to see what's happening to the people caught in this mess." They found the planet Nexus 7, a former Imperial colony that had been cut off from the rest of the Empire. The world's surface was covered with cities built around crystal spires, but most of them were dark and empty. Only a few settlements showed signs of life. Amy led a landing party to the largest surviving city. What they found was heartbreaking. The inhabitants were struggling to survive without their crystal technology. The artificial atmosphere was failing, the power grid was down, and the food production systems had stopped working. "Please," said the city's leader, a thin alien with blue skin and large eyes, "we need help. Our children are dying." Amy looked around at the desperate faces surrounding her. These were the people who had once been part of a mighty empire. Now they were refugees, in their own world, abandoned by their government and left to die. "We'll do what we can," Amy promised. "But we need to understand what happened here. Can you tell us about the ship that caused all this?" The alien leader looked confused. "Ship? We don't know about any ship. One day our crystals were working. Fine. The next day they started failing. We thought it was some kind of plague or curse." Amy realized that most of the Empire's population had no idea what had really happened. They knew their technology was failing, but they didn't know why. The truth about the quantum torpedo was known only to a few high-ranking officials. As Amy and her team worked to provide emergency aid to the survivors, she began to understand the true scope of the disaster. The Zephyrian Empire had not just lost its technology. It had lost its identity, its purpose, its reason for existing. The people were not just physically displaced. They were spiritually broken. But Amy also saw something else. In the ruins of the old empire, new communities were forming. Humans were working alongside alien refugees to build shelters and share resources. Former enemies were becoming allies in the struggle for survival. The quantum torpedo had destroyed more than just a fleet of ships. It had destroyed the barriers between species, the walls that had kept different peoples apart for centuries. In the chaos of the collapse, something new was being born. Jake Morrison was still making his way home, unaware that his single act of desperation had changed the course of galactic history. His ship's engines were working again, but slowly. It would take him months to reach human space dot as he traveled through the wreckage of the Zephyrian Empire. Jake began to see the scope of what had happened. Dead space stations drifted in the void. Abandoned ships floated hell. 3 months after the mysterious ship vanished, the truth finally came to light. Jake Morrison's damaged vessel limped into the human frontier station at Vol 359, carrying with it the most important secret in the galaxy. The young pilot was thin and exhausted, haunted by what he had seen and done. Commander Sarah Blake met him at the docking bay. She had been expecting a routine exploration report, not the confession of a man who had accidentally destroyed an empire. Jake's hands shook as he handed over his ship's data logs. "I need to speak with Dr. Chun," Jake said. "She needs to know what her weapon did." Sarah looked at the readings from Jake's ship. The quantum signatures were unlike anything she had ever seen. "What weapon? What are you talking about?" "The torpedo. The one that was supposed to disable enemy ships. I used it to defend myself, and it it killed everything. An entire fleet just disappeared." Within hours, Jake was on a fast transport to Earth, escorted by military guards who had been ordered to keep him safe and silent. The implications of his story were too dangerous to let spread without careful consideration. Dr. Lisa Chun was waiting for him at the Lunar Research Station. She had been tracking the quantum disruption for months, trying to understand what was happening in the Andromeda sector. When she saw Jake's data, her worst fears were confirmed. "The weapon wasn't supposed to work like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was designed to create a localized space-time distortion. A few seconds at most, affecting only the immediate target." Jake slumped in his chair. "Well, it didn't work that way. It created something that spread across their entire empire. I've been traveling through their space for weeks. It's all gone, Dr. Chun. Every world, every station, every ship. All in it." Lisa stared at the data flowing across her screens. The quantum readings showed a pattern of destruction that defied everything she knew about physics. The weapon had somehow synchronized with the aliens' technology, turning their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Their entire civilization was built on quantum-entangled crystals, she realized. When the torpedo disrupted the quantum field, it created a cascade effect through their network. Every crystal in their empire became a source of destruction. The weight of that realization hit both of them at the same time. They had not just destroyed a fleet of ships. They had committed what could only be called genocide against an entire species. The moral implications were staggering. General Anderson arrived the next day with Colonel Steve Parker, the military's top expert on alien technologies. The meeting was classified at the highest levels, attended only by those who needed to know the truth. "How many?" Anderson asked bluntly. "How many died?" Lisa checked her calculations one more time. "Based on the size of their empire and the population estimates we have, probably around 50 billion sentient beings. Maybe more." The room fell silent. Even hardened military officers struggled to comprehend numbers that large. It was not just the largest military victory in human history. It was the largest act of destruction ever committed by their species. "We need to keep this quiet," Anderson said finally. "If word gets out that we destroyed an entire civilization, it could cause panic. Other alien species might see us as a threat." "We are a threat," Jake said quietly. "I've seen what's left of their empire. Billions of people dead, their worlds in ruins, their survivors scattered and desperate. We did that. I did that." Colonel Parker spoke up. "You were defending yourself against a hostile fleet. Any military commander would have done the same thing. Would they?" Jake asked. "Would they have used a weapon they didn't understand? Would they have pulled the trigger without knowing what it would do?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The truth was that humanity had developed the quantum torpedo without fully understanding its capabilities. They had created a weapon of mass destruction and then handed it to a pilot who was thousands of light years from home. Dr. Chun was already working on the next problem. "The quantum disruption is still spreading," she reported. "It's slowing down, but it hasn't stopped. At this rate, it could affect other sectors of the galaxy." "Can we stop it?" Anderson asked. "I don't know. We're dealing with forces we barely understand. The quantum field in that region of space has been permanently altered. It might be impossible to reverse." Reports began coming in from human exploration, ships that had ventured into the former Empire territory. Captain Amy Rodriguez sent detailed accounts of the devastation she had witnessed. Entire star systems were dark, their planets stripped of artificial atmospheres and left to die. But Amy also reported something unexpected. In the ruins of the Empire, new communities were forming. Humans were working alongside alien refugees to build settlements and share resources. Former enemies were becoming allies in the struggle for survival. "The survivors are organizing," Amy reported. "They're forming councils, establishing trade routes, creating new governments. It's chaotic, but it's also hopeful. They're building something new from the ashes of the old." This news created a new dilemma for human leadership. If they revealed the truth about the quantum torpedo, it would destroy the fragile alliances that were forming. The alien refugees who were working with humans would see them as mass murderers. The cooperation that was beginning to emerge would turn into hatred and fear, but keeping the secret was also dangerous. Other alien species were starting to investigate the collapse of the Zephyrian Empire. If they discovered the truth on their own, the consequences could be even worse. A month later, the first alien delegation arrived at Earth. They were representatives of the Kalari Confederation, a group of worlds that had been enslaved by the Zephyrians for over 1,000 years. Their leader was a tall, graceful being named Velkaris, who had once been a slave, but was now a free leader. "We come to thank you," Velkaris said to the assembled human officials. "Your mysterious ship saved our people from endless slavery. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." The irony was bitter. The same weapon that had committed genocide was being praised as an instrument of liberation. The humans squirmed uncomfortably as Velkaris spoke of freedom and justice. "We don't know what happened to your ship," General Anderson lied. "Our deep space sensors detected the quantum disruption, but we lost contact with any vessels in that area." Velkaris nodded sadly. "We understand. Whoever they were, they sacrificed themselves to free us. We have built a memorial to the unknown heroes who destroyed the Empire." After the delegation left, the human leadership was more divided than ever. Some, like Colonel Parker, argued that they should reveal the truth and face the consequences. Others, like General Anderson, insisted that the secret must be kept to preserve the peace. Dr. Chun found herself caught in the middle. As the creator of the weapon, she felt responsible for its consequences. but she also understood the political realities. If the truth came out, it could lead to war between humans and the alien species that had been freed from slavery. "We're living a lie," she said to Jake during one of their many conversations. "Every day we don't tell the truth, we're betraying the people who think we're heroes." Jake had been struggling with the same problem. He had become a reluctant celebrity in human space, praised as the pilot who had survived contact with a hostile alien empire. But he knew the real story. He was not a hero. He was a man who had panicked and fired a weapon he didn't understand. "I keep thinking about the children," Jake said. "All those alien kids who died because I was scared. They didn't choose to be part of an empire. They were just living their lives." The psychological burden was taking its toll on both of them. Lisa had stopped sleeping, spending her nights trying to find a way to reverse the quantum damage. Jake had requested transfer to a remote research station, unable to face the crowds who wanted to hear his heroic story. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Empire's collapse was accelerating. The Thorax, master engineers, who had once built weapons for their oppressors, were now using their skills to analyze the quantum disruption. Their leader, Chief Engineer Nex Voller, was brilliant and methodical. "The destruction pattern is too precise to be natural," Nex Voller reported to the Refugee Council. "This was a weapon specifically designed to exploit quantum-entangled systems. Whoever built it understood our technology better than we did." The net was closing around the truth. Other alien scientists were reaching similar conclusions. It was only a matter of time before someone traced the quantum signature back to its source. The moment came 6 weeks later, when a joint research team of Kalari and Thorax scientists detected residual quantum particles in Jake's ship. Captain Amy Rodriguez had brought a group of refugee engineers to the human station as part of a cultural exchange program. One of them, a young Thorax named Kel Mora, had instruments sensitive enough to detect the weapon's signature. "This ship," Kel Mora said, his voice filled with confusion and growing anger. "This ship carries traces of the weapon that destroyed our empire." The secret was out. Within hours, the news had spread throughout the refugee communities. The humans were not liberators. They were the destroyers. The mysterious ship had not been mysterious at all. It had been one of their own. The reaction was swift and devastating. The fragile alliances that had been forming between humans and aliens collapsed. 1 year after the trial, the galaxy was a very different place. The former Zephyrian Empire had been replaced by a complex network of independent worlds, each struggling to find its place in the new order. Some had succeeded in building stable governments, while others remained chaotic and dangerous. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Haven Station, watching supply ships arrive with refugee families from the outer worlds. His hair had turned gray in the past year, and deep lines marked his face. The weight of 50 billion deaths was not something a person could carry without it changing them. "Another transport from Vega 7, said his assistant, Maria Santos, a young human who had volunteered to help with the resettlement program. 300 families this time, mostly Kalari, with some Thorax engineers." Jake nodded and made notes on his tablet. Each family needed housing, medical care, education for their children, and job training. It was overwhelming work, but it was also necessary. These people had lost everything because of his actions. The least he could do was help them build new lives. Dr. Lisa Chun was working in her laboratory on the other side of the station. She had aged even more than Jake, her once dark hair now completely white. The Quantum Research Institute she had established was making slow progress in understanding the damage caused by her weapon. "We've managed to stabilize the quantum fields around Altair 4, she reported to the Refugee Council during their weekly meeting. "The planet should be habitable again within a few years." But the major industrial worlds are still too damaged to repair. The news was both hopeful and depressing. Some progress was being made, but it would take generations to undo the damage caused by a single moment of fear and desperation. The political landscape of the former empire was equally complex. The Kalari Confederation had become the largest of the new governments, controlling over 30 star systems. They had embraced democracy with enthusiasm, perhaps because it was so different from the authoritarian rule they had endured for centuries. Vel Caries, now president of the Confederation, worked closely with human authorities despite the painful history between their peoples. He understood that cooperation was necessary for survival, even if forgiveness was still difficult. "We cannot change what happened," he said during a joint session with human leaders. "But we can choose what happens next. Our children deserve a galaxy where such tragedies are impossible." The Thorax had taken a different path, forming a loose alliance of independent worlds focused on engineering and technology. Their leader, Nexvoller, had become obsessed with preventing future disasters through better understanding of dangerous technologies. "The humans created a weapon they did not understand," he said during a scientific conference. "We must ensure that no species ever makes that mistake again. Knowledge without wisdom is the path to destruction." Not all of the former imperial species had adapted so well to freedom. The Zephyrians themselves were scattered and bitter, many of them unable to accept the loss of their empire. Some had formed extremist groups that blamed humans for destroying their perfect society. Lord Commander Zeknol had gathered the remnants of the imperial fleet around a dead world called Terminus. His followers still believed in Zephyrian superiority and refused to accept the new reality. They called themselves the True Empire and vowed to restore their former glory. "The humans are a disease," Zeknol declared to his followers. "They destroyed our civilization with their primitive savagery. We must prepare for the day when we can take our revenge." The True Empire was small and weak compared to the old imperial fleet, but they were dangerous because of their desperation. They had attacked several refugee convoys and raided isolated human settlements. The new governments were struggling to deal with this threat without starting a larger war. Captain Amy Rodriguez had been promoted to admiral and given command of the joint peacekeeping force that patrolled the former empire territory. Her fleet included ships from a dozen different species, all working together to maintain order in the chaos. "It's like trying to hold water in your hands," she explained to General Anderson during one of their regular briefings. "Just when we think we've got control of one sector, something explodes in another. The extremists are getting bolder." The human government was also dealing with internal problems. News of the genocide had split public opinion down the middle. Some people supported the decision to take responsibility and help the refugees. Others believed humans were being taken advantage of by ungrateful aliens. A political movement called Humanity first had gained support by arguing that humans should withdraw from alien territories and focus on protecting their own worlds. Their leader, Senator Mike Crawford, gave speeches calling the refugee program a waste of resources. "We're spending billions to help people who hate us," Crawford said during a rally on Earth. "Meanwhile, our own colonies lack basic infrastructure. It's time to put humanity first and let the aliens solve their own problems." The movement had grown stronger after several terrorist attacks on human worlds by Zephyrian extremists. Fear and anger were powerful forces, and many humans were beginning to question whether helping the refugees was worth the risk. Dr. Chun found herself at the center of these debates. Some people called her a hero for taking responsibility for her actions. Others called her a traitor for giving weapons technology to aliens. She tried to stay focused on her research, but the political pressure was becoming unbearable. "Maybe I should have kept quiet," she said to Jake during one of their regular meetings. Maybe it would have been better if the truth had stayed hidden. Jake shook his head. The truth would have come out eventually. At least this way, we had some control over how it happened. And we're doing something to fix the damage. Are we? Chun asked. Sometimes I think we're just making it worse. The extremists use our help as proof that humans are trying to control the galaxy. The refugees see our aid as admission of guilt. Maybe everyone would be better off without us. It was a dark time for both of them. The weight of their actions seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. But there were also moments of hope that kept them going. One such moment came when a group of young aliens visited the research station. They were students from the new universities that had been established on refugee worlds, studying quantum, physics, and interstellar relations. They had come to meet the woman who had created the weapon that changed their lives. Dr. Chun, said a young Kalari named Olivris, we want to thank you. Chun was surprised. Thank me? I destroyed your civilization. You destroyed the Empire, Olivris corrected. But the Empire was not our civilization. It was our prison. Yes, many people died, and that is terrible. But millions more are now free to choose their own path. My parents were slaves. I am a student. That would have been impossible under the old system. The words brought tears to Chun's eyes. She had heard similar sentiments from other young refugees, but it still surprised her each time. For them, the collapse of the Empire was not just a tragedy. It was also an opportunity. The new generation was different from their parents. They had grown up in the aftermath of the collapse, when cooperation between species was necessary for survival. They didn't carry the same prejudices and fears that had shaped the old galaxy. Jake saw this most clearly in his work with refugee families. The children adapted quickly to their new homes, learning human languages and making friends with kids from other species. They played games together, studied together, and dreamed of futures that their parents could never have imagined. Maybe that's our real legacy, Jake said to Maria Santos as they watched a group of mixed-species children playing in the station's recreational area. Not the destruction we caused, but the unity that grew from it. The first anniversary of the Empire's collapse was marked by ceremonies across the galaxy. On some worlds, it was a day of mourning for the dead. On others, it was a celebration of freedom. Most places tried to balance both emotions, remembering the tragedy while honoring the hope that had emerged from it. The memorial on New Haven Station was simple but powerful. It consisted of 50 billion lights, each one representing a life lost in the collapse. The lights formed a spiral pattern that could be seen from orbit, beautiful and haunting at the same time. Dr. Chun and Jake stood together at the memorial service, surrounded by refugees, human colonists, and representatives from dozens of worlds. The crowd was diverse in ways that would have been impossible under the old empire. Former enemies stood side by side, united by their shared experience of loss and rebuilding. President Valkyries gave the main speech. His words carried across the galaxy by the new communication networks that had replaced the old crystal technology. 1 year ago, our galaxy changed forever, he said. An empire that had seemed eternal collapsed in a matter of days. Billions died, and those who survived faced an uncertain future. But from that chaos, something new has emerged. Not perfect, not without problems, but something that gives us hope. He gestured to the crowd around him. Look at us, humans and Kalari, thorax and refugees from 100 different worlds. We are not the same species, but we share the same sky. We face the same challenges. We dream the same dreams of peace and prosperity for our children. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence for the D.